Today, I'd like to go a bit in depth on the idea of lifelong learning. And when we talk about lifelong learning, the way I want you to think about it is that you are either choosing a life of pleasure or a life of wisdom. Should you be pursuing a life of wisdom, then what that means is that you are going to be pursuing lifelong learning. When you think about how education came here, where we are, is it came in as a tool. So the missionaries came and all the other people came and they set up these schools. And the idea of educating us in these schools was that we were then going to be better workers. We were going to get jobs in government. And indeed, this was the situation. Yeah, when you think about when our parents talk about it, oh, when us we would finish university, when us we finish schools, would be snapped up by the civil service immediately. So, in other words, our education was very functional. And to a certain extent, and now you can let me know in the comment section if you agree or disagree, I still think that this is still the state of play. In that every time people are talking about schooling and about education, they're always talking about so that you can get a job, right? And that's okay because as Aristotle tells us, obviously a person is going to need to learn a trade. But now, going deeper into this question of lifelong learning, what I want to talk about is an idea which was introduced by Plato. And Plato introduces this idea when he's talking in his book, The Republic, chapter 7. And in this book, what he's talking about is that he's thinking of a perfect republic, which is going to be great and it's going to be fantastic, and people are going to be, ruled with wisdom, etc. And so, of course, then they ask the question, but hey, where are we going to get people who are rulers, who are going to be the keepers of this kingdom of ours, of this wonderful new state of ours? They ask, yeah, in the Republic. And Plato says, yes, actually, what will have to happen, we're going to need to train the people who are going to be the keepers of the kingdom. And therefore, he says that we're going to have to introduce to them an education which is basically going to be a moral education. So they will not only learn craft as such, Aristotle comes in later on to say they can learn a craft, but they will also need an aspect of morality. And when you go back to African culture, it was pretty much the same idea. There was always an aspect of education and educating people in what we'd call just basic morality. And that is all how to live together as a society, right? And this would be through the proverbs, it would be through the stories that they are being told. They are basically were being formed, their character was being formed. So education, even in the African context, was not just looking at one aspect of a person, it was also looking at character building. Now, going back to the Republic, Plato's argument was very simple. And he said that if we have leaders who give in to the worst aspects of themselves, if they give in to greed, they give in to envy, they give in to vanity, lust for power, people will suffer. People will die under such a ruler. And if you've ever been in a situation where the leader was very self-centered, you know what he was talking about and you know that he was right. Therefore, any person who is in a position of a leadership, and this includes that even within the family setup, we must ensure that this person, whoever they are constantly fighting against these negative aspects of themselves. And this education never ends. Why? Because we are always going to be human. It's just that what is going to change is the context. So when the people are younger, when children are younger, they're going to be told, well, don't fight with each other. You must learn how to share. And then, of course, as you get older, the education is going to change. It's going to be, okay, this is how you make a right decision. This is how you make a decision which is for the greater good of everybody involved. And so you see, throughout our lives, what is happening is we are being taught such that we are becoming wiser. And so when we talk about this kind of wisdom, we are going to think about it in two aspects. The first aspect is the wisdom where we struggle against our bad habits through self-knowledge, to know that we have a tendency towards pride. I have a tendency towards dominating other people, right? And then the second aspect of this wisdom is going to come through an understanding of other people, right? And the way that this is happening is that we get a more nuanced understanding of human nature. Yes, individual people, but also of human nature. And that way we will be better able to guide them. How does reading come into play here? Now, when you think about reading here, think about reading autobiographies. You're going to think about reading history books. You're going to think about reading philosophy. And of course, you're going to think about reading fantastic and great novels. All these have to be tested through time. So you'll want to read novels that have been tested through time, and it shows that the ideas that they are espousing there through the ages have proved to be correct. The same idea with the autobiographies, the same idea is going to happen with the philosophies, and the same idea is going to happen with the history books. Okay? And now I'll tell you an interesting story that I once had, which helped me to understand this idea. I was listening to a pilot who was explaining why it is very safe to fly in an aeroplane, and therefore we shouldn't be very scared. And he was explaining that pilots are very, very well trained. Why, he says? Because they go through many, many, many simulations. And these simulations are updated every 6 months. Their certification is updated every 6 months or something like that. And so he says that it is highly unlikely that the pilot flying your airplane, it's very unlikely that he's going to come up against a situation that he has not already experienced before. By reading these books, you will never come across something that has not happened before. Recently, I have been reading Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. There's a section where Hobbes says, concerning the offices of one sovereign to another. In other words, he's talking about what is the best way that a ruler should be, right? The sovereign. He says, concerning the offices of one sovereign to another, which are comprehended in that law, which is commonly called the law of nations. I need not say anything in this place because the law of nations and the law of nature is the same thing. And what does this mean? He says, and every sovereign hath the same right in procuring the safety of his people that any particular man can have in procuring the safety of his own body. In short, therefore, he says, in the same way that it is natural for a sovereign, for a person to take care of their own body, in that very same way should every leader take care of the whole country, of the state. Hence, the law of nature and the law of nations matches and is the same. So do you see, by reading these kinds of books, when you're in a position of leadership, when you're in a position of governing other people, you will then know what is the expectation from you. So it's not about being taken for 10 staff trainings where you'll have to be told 5 ways in which to make sure that you get staff feedback and 10 ways in which you're going to make sure that people are happy in the office. Those are very well and good. But if we're going to talk about ensuring that the person is a good leader, then we will definitely need to go back to the classical methods. And in this way, then one will have to take up classical readings. Therefore, we will then be well on the path to continuous education, a path where we are choosing not a life of pleasure, but a life of wisdom. Now, what do I mean when I'm talking about not choosing a life of pleasure, but rather choosing a life of wisdom? You see, if our life is going to be targeting, I'm going to work, I'm going to get this education system, and when I get the education system, I'm going to get a fantastic job, then we know what the next thing is. Then you're going to get a big house, and you're going to get a swimming pool, and then you're going to get many holidays. That's what a life of pleasure looks like, because we are always looking for the next pleasurable thing. And as often will happen, after a certain level, you've only played golf so much, you've only had so many swimming pools, you've only traveled to so many countries. We begin to realize that this life of pleasure does not satisfy, which is very different from a life of wisdom. A life of wisdom satisfies immensely. Again, I encourage you, we must read. Choose a life of wisdom. Choose lifelong learning.